finally got here. I trust you've had a fruitful day. I do not say happy, but I'm hoping that it has been a happy day for you. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Homage to the Buddha, the blessed, noble, and fully self-awakened one. So this evening, we're going to tackle middle name saying number 60, which is called the guaranteed or the incontrovertible truth, according to Bhikkhu Bodhi. Depends who translates. And it's going to look at the teachings around nihilism, around the non-consequence of those who believe that there's no consequence to actions, and those who believe that we are governed by fate. Now, when you read the scriptures, you have to understand where the Buddha is coming from. He's not particularly interested in the philosophy of stuff, not even the general psychology, a specific psychology to do with how we cause suffering. That's what he's on about. Of course, it engulfs a tremendous amount of our psychology. And he's clear about the path. The path is an ethical path. It's about relationship. And to understand that, we have to go back to the origins of our problems, which is right here and now. It's not an original thing that's happened in the past, although it has happened in the past. It's happening now. The delusion itself of who we are. So this intuitive awareness that we are is mistaking itself by way of identity with the form it finds itself in, which is the human being. And it just wants to be happy. So it's trying to find happiness as a constant in this form. And that's where all the trouble begins. Now, so you have to remember that the whole teaching of the scriptures, I'm pretty sure if you check it out, is all about ethics and transcendence. And the path of ethics leads to transcendence. See, that's the point. The path of ethics leads to transcendence. And the path of ethics is a simple case of doing good and bad at a moral level. Remember, it's about our whole relationship to this life, which is about attachment, about dependency. And the road leading to that is the one that gets rid of that dependency. That's the road of renunciation. So keeping that in mind, here we have the Buddha. He's in Sala with the Kosalans. In Kosala, so that's the same place as Savatthi, where his main monastery was, at least one of his main monasteries. And he meets it's a Brahmin village, and he meets the Brahmins, and they know about him. They know that he's the Blessed One, fully awakened. He's got this great reputation, and they actually go up to the Buddha. So he's sitting there by himself usually. Oh, he's wandering around, and they approach him. You see, and the Buddha says to them, "So, is there some other teacher you're happy with, in whom you have acquired faith?" He said, "No, sir. Since you haven't found a teacher you're happy with, you should undertake and implement this guaranteed teachings. And when the guaranteed teaching, this incontrovertible truth, is undertaken, it will be for your lasting welfare and happiness." So it first of all talks about nihilism. Now, nihilism here is specifically the type of person who not simply believes that life is meaningless, but that he then, because of that, rejects all religious and moral principles. So he is amoral. He doesn't have any morals. And it's difficult to come across somebody like that, or at least who behaves like that. Even if you thought that, you would still obviously behave according to the conventions of the society you were in, or else you might find yourself locked away. So here's the first statement. Now, once we've got this understood, by the way, it works for the other two about karma and about destiny. So some ascetics and Brahmins who have this doctrine, there's no meaning in giving, sacrifice, or offerings. There's no fruit or result for good or bad actions. There's no afterlife. There's no obligation to mother and father. There are no beings being reborn spontaneously. And there's no ascetic or Brahmin who is well attained and practiced and who describes the afterlife after realizing it with their own insight. So here we have somebody who says that, first of all, the idea of doing good is a waste of time because life is essentially meaningless. And all these people who say that there is an afterlife and etc. are really just up the wall and down the alley. So, so then, of course, he gives the opposite, which we don't have to read. And then he says, right, so these are the arguments that he puts forward against that. So you can expect such people to reject good conduct by way of body, speech, and mind, and undertake and implement bad conduct by body, speech, and mind. I think this may be true in revolutionary circumstances where a nihilist might just be out to destroy, kill, etc. And the reason he does this is because he doesn't see the drawbacks, the wretchedness and corruption that he's going to have for himself and for others. And that skillful qualities have the benefit and the cleansing power of renunciation. So those who are on the path, of renunciation will find themselves feeling, will get the benefits of that and the cleansing of the heart. Now, because of this wrong view, this leads to wrong thinking, wrong thought. And from wrong thought, there comes wrong speech. And then they contradict those perfect ones who know the outer world. So here the Buddha is presuming within the argument that those who have experienced the other world are, in fact, saying the truth. And they go around convincing others to accept this untrue teaching. On account of that, they glorify themselves and put others down. So if there's one thing that substantiates your particular view and opinion is if you can convert somebody else to it. And if you have followers who agree with you, then it feels even more truthful. So the fact that you have lots of people agreeing with you doesn't mean it's truth at all. In fact, I remember, if I'm right, Gandhi said truth can be in a minority of one. So in this case, we have wrong view, wrong thought, wrong speech, contradicting the noble ones, convincing others to accept untrue teaching, and glorifying oneself and putting others down. Now, the next argument is, if there is no other world, then in a sense, they're safe because they die and annihilate. So that's not a problem. If there is another world, of course, then they will be reborn in a place of loss, a bad place, an underworld, a hell. Again, this is always on the presumption of the moral fabric of the universe. It's a moral law that runs out through the whole cosmos. All levels of being run according to the moral law. That's the assumption, yeah? Now, let's assume that those who say there is no world are correct. They would still be criticized, such people, nihilists, would be still criticized by sensible people in the present life as immoral individuals, right? So it's because they're living an unethical life. But if there really is another life, they lose on both counts. For they're criticized by sensible people in this life, and then when they die, they're reborn in a place of loss, a bad place, the underworld, a hell. So those are your arguments. And I'm reminded of Blaise Pascal, who was the mathematician and theologian, I suppose, in the 17th century. I think he was born 1600 and something. Basically said the scientific revolution was happening, and some people were doubting the existence of God. So he said, well, Pascal's wager is, whether there is a God or not, it might be sensible to live as if there is. So the Buddhist argument is, there may not be an afterlife, and there may be an afterlife, but it's sensible to wager that, that there is one, because at least then, as the Buddha says, you'll win in both ways, both in this life as an ethical being, and in the next life, a heavenly being. Remember, these are pure nihilists. They're not, shall we say, that doesn't include people who would consider themselves humanists. So they might not believe in God or an afterlife. In fact, lots of people would take that position. But of course, they still have a connection with human beings. They realize that to live a social life, you need to have ethics, and you need to have some sort of social and economic justice. In fact, when you think about it, the UN Declaration of Human Rights, there's no mention of God, afterlife, or anything. It's just a basic statement of how human beings should treat each other. So now, the opposite is true, of course, so we don't have to read that. So that's all to do with nihilism, right? Which is, remember, if we go back to that definition, where am I? Here we are. Somewhere here, that's right. Someone who believes that life is essentially meaningless and rejects all religious and moral principles. So now the next one is karma, and it doesn't mention, the commentary doesn't mention a teacher for the nihilists, but it does mention a teacher for the karma, and that there's no consequence to karma, called Purana Kassapa. He's one of the 6 teachers that's mentioned. So this is what he says. The one who acts does nothing wrong when they punish, mutilate, torture, aggrieve, oppress, intimidate, and when they encourage others to do the same. They do nothing wrong when they kill, steal, break in houses, plunder wealth, steal from isolated buildings, commit highway robbery, commit adultery, and lie. And if they were to reduce all living creatures in this world to one heap and mass of flesh with a razor-edged disc, no evil comes of them, and no outcome of evil. If you go along the south bank of the Ganges, killing, mutilating, and torturing, and encourage others to do the same, no evil comes of that, and no outcome of evil. And if you were to go along the north bank of the Ganges, giving and sacrificing and encouraging others to do the same, no merit comes of that, and no outcome of merit. If giving, self-control, restraint, and truthfulness, in giving, self-control, restraint, and truthfulness, there's no merit and no outcome of merit. So that's a bit of a dismal view of life, isn't it? So now it's the same arguments that we come across. Let's see now. So what they don't see, what the Buddha says is, of course, is they don't see the drawbacks, the sordidness, the corruption, and that unskillful qualities have the benefit, and that skillful qualities have the benefit and cleansing power of renunciation. The fact is that this man, Purana Kassapa, was one of the gurus who was going around at that time, and he never did anything like that, I should think. But anyway, that's his position. So what they don't realize is that such people who live like that, who don't care about what they do or the consequences of what they do, obviously have not a very good heart. And they don't understand the benefit and cleansing power of renunciation. Now, since action actually does have an effect, then of course this whole position that Purana Kassapa has taken is wrong view. And from that, there arises wrong thought, wrong speech. They contradict those perfected ones who teach that action is effective, and they convince others of this untrue teaching. They glorify themselves and put others down. So that's what they're doing. Now, if there is no effective action, then of course, when the body breaks up, they're safe because they annihilate, right? But if there is effective action, of course, then they'll be reborn in a bad place because there are consequences. Now let's assume there's no effective action. Is that it's correct to say there is no effective action, then this individual would be regarded by sensible people in the present life as being immoral, an individual with wrong view. Now, if there is an afterlife, he loses on both counts. Criticized by sensible people in the present life, and when he's reborn, he ends up in hell. So the same arguments are put to people who don't believe that there's any consequence to actions. It's hard to believe that anybody would have thought that, really, unless you take the next position, which is non-causality. Now, this is a bit more might give an understanding to the factor that there is no benefit or no consequence to actions. So there's no, this is the teacher here was Mihaly Gosala. So he's one of the other six. There is no cause or condition for the corruption of sentient beings. Sentient beings are corrupted without cause or reason. There's no cause or condition for the purification of sentient beings. Sentient beings are purified without cause or reason. There is no power, no energy, no courageous strength or vigor. All sentient beings, all living beings, all souls lack control, power, and energy. Molded by destiny, circumstance, and nature, they experience pleasure and pain in the 6 levels of rebirth. The 6 classes of rebirth are to do with the way the Ajivakas, the other teachers, saw the gradations of spiritual growth. But here's the important point, that everything we do is already been set by destiny, the circumstance you're in, and nature. So that's an old argument, whether we're natured or by nurture, but it's all set. Now, I did read a book about materialism, and in it, the man mentions a case, the writer mentions a case in the US of a murderer who was not convicted of murder, even though he actually did it and was proved that he did it, because he was found to be not responsible because of his upbringing and social situation. So that was a tie. So that's a case in point where somebody is not taken to be. He wasn't mad. He just it was the circumstance and nature, and it was the destiny that he had because of his circumstance. So there we are. So then, of course, now the arguments against are the usual. There is no cause or condition for the corruption of sentient beings. So such a person will reject good conduct by body, speech, and mind. He'll just say, well, I'm conditioned. Remember that the Buddha's sense of conditioning is always a choice. You can't be unconditioned as a human being. You are conditioned by as a human being, but you have this moment of choice whenever you see a desire arise. You can say to yourself, well, I'm going to exercise that desire, or I'm going to let that desire disappear. Right? That's where, should we say, our little point of freedom is. And of course, they don't see the drawbacks, the sordidness and degradation and corruption, and that skillful qualities have the benefit and cleansing power of renunciation. And then the usual thing, it leads to wrong view, wrong thought, wrong speech, contradicting the noble ones, convincing others to accept untrue teachings, glorifying themselves, and putting others down. That's it, I think, isn't it? Yes, and then the usual argument, if there is no causality, then of course on the individual's breakup of the body, they will be safe because they presume annihilation. But unfortunately, if there is a future life, then of course, because of their bad actions, they'll be reborn in a bad place, an underworld. And if we say, well, supposing the ones who say there is no causality are correct, even so, they'll be criticized in this very life as being immoral. And if, of course, there is a future life, then they lose on both counts of being criticized in this life and of ending up in a bad place after death. So there we are. That's the oops, I've got spending some time. So when you read the scriptures, remind yourself that the Buddha is not coming from some specifically philosophical point of view or a generalized psychological point of view, but always from an ethical point of view. And that's where his arguments lie. So what we've looked at is these three things about the nihilist, the person who doesn't believe that there's any consequence to our actions, and the person who believes that everything is fate. We don't have a choice at all. So there is more. I'll finish the rest of the discourse tomorrow. So I'm hoping that you found that interesting. Anyway, it's shall we say, a little bit up in the air a bit. How does it affect our practice? Well, it's really for us to reflect on what do we believe, and we have to be very careful not to come to conclusions. And that's what he says in the next part of this discourse. So I can only hope that you will continue your practice and that you will be liberated from all suffering sooner rather than later. So we'll do some practice.